Tonight's tale begins in the quiet village of Carsley, where a simple WI evening unravels into poison, secrets, and danger stalking the lanes. Settle in as Agatha's world tilts from petty rivalries to life-threatening intrigue. Where in the world are you listening from tonight? And make sure to subscribe so you never miss upcoming mysteries. The fairy lights twinkled with a level of cheer Agatha considered personally insulting. Carsley's WI hall was packed to the rafters with women bustling about like overexcited hens, trays clattering, voices overlapping, and that unmistakable aroma of stews, pastries, and far too much competitive goodwill. Outside, dusk folded over the Cotswold fields in soft blue layers, but indoors the air was warm and smug. Agatha Raisin, dressed in a sharply tailored emerald skirt suit entirely unsuited to communal cooking, planted her casserole dish on the long table with an air of triumph. "Sensible shepherd's pie," she announced, trying for breezy confidence. "A family recipe." Doris Simpson, at the other end of the table, gave a sniff. "Funny sort of family, Mrs. Raisin. Looks very uniform." Agatha ignored her. Uniform indeed. It had taken her a full 10 minutes to decant the shop-bought thing into her dish without splashing gravy on her jacket. That should have counted as cooking in any reasonable society. But the WI was not reasonable. Women glided past, arranging savoury pies, beetroot salads, and quiches that looked like magazine covers. Agatha was admiring the glow of her dish under the hall lights when she noticed Doris ambling towards her handbag. Doris had the sort of curiosity best cured by a locked room and a heavy key. "Don't touch that," Agatha snapped. It was too late. Doris had already spotted the incriminating packaging sticking out from the slightly open zip. Mercester Market shepherd's pie, family size. A small, dreadful gasp escaped Doris. Then came her triumphant proclamation, "Shop bought!" The room turned as one. The expressions ranged from amusement to outright glee. Someone tittered. Another whispered, "Oh dear." Then came a shrill, delighted cackle from the newcomer, Felicity Trimmings, who stood with one manicured hand poised on her hip. Felicity, with her glossy black bob and London polish, had joined the WI only a month earlier and had already made a hobby of humiliating Agatha. She now leaned forward as if examining a museum exhibit. "Agatha, darling," she crowed, "you must tell us which shop stocks your family traditions. We'd all love the shortcut." Snickers rippled along the tables. Agatha felt heat climb her cheeks. She opened her mouth to deliver a scathing retort, but no words arrived. Instead, something tight lodged in her throat. Rage, embarrassment, and a strong desire to pull Felicity's hair. "I'm going for air," she snapped, snatching up her handbag and marching toward the door. She felt 20 pairs of eyes drilling into her back, enjoying every step of her retreat. Typical Carsley. One whiff of scandal and they'd circle like seagulls around a chip. Outside, the evening had settled into a crisp stillness. The lights of the hall spilled across the gravel like warm honey, far too pretty for her mood. Agatha folded her arms and drew a sharp breath, telling herself that she didn't care what a roomful of gossiping villagers thought. She'd weathered worse, she reminded herself. Much worse. "Agatha?" Bill Wong emerged from the shadows, wearing a reflective vest that suggested he'd been forced into some organizational duty. He looked apologetic, which irritated her even more. "Parking marshal," he explained. "They roped me in. Something about needing an official presence." "Official presence?" Agatha exclaimed. "From the looks of it, what this village needs is a good therapist." Bill gave her a sympathetic smile. "What happened?" "Oh, nothing," she said, lighting a cigarette with an angry flourish. "Just Doris Simpson doing her usual impression of a bloodhound, and that wretched Felicity laughing like a hyena in stilettos." Bill's mouth twitched. "Agatha, you could have just said the pie was shop-bought." "In this village," she snorted, "I'd have had fewer consequences confessing to murder." She took a long drag, letting the irritation settle. Above them, the hall windows glowed, silhouettes moving busily. A faint hum of chatter carried through the open doorway. Agatha exhaled a plume of smoke and tilted her chin upward, pretending she felt entirely unbothered. Then came the scream. A sharp, high sound slashed the evening open. The hall doors banged wide and women spilled out in a wave of panic. Felicity Trimmings staggered onto the gravel, clutching her throat. "Bill," Agatha began, but Bill was already sprinting forward. Felicity took 2 wobbling steps before collapsing hard onto her knees. Her wineglass rolled from her fingers, clinking against a stone. She gasped, her eyes wide and glassy, then sagged sideways onto the ground. Chaos erupted. Shouts of "Call someone!" and "Get water!" filled the air. A few women hovered helplessly. Others shrieked in dramatic harmony. Agatha hurried closer and knelt beside the fallen woman. Felicity's face was pale, glistening with sweat. Agatha noticed the wineglass lying near her hand and, without thinking, lifted it for a sniff. A faint almond scent curled up from the rim. Something jolted in Agatha's chest. She knew that smell. Hadn't she once read about cyanide in a mystery novel? She stared at the glass, then at Felicity's contorted face. "Bill," she said sharply. "Her drink. Smell it." Bill took the glass, sniffed and stiffened. His calm expression cracked. "Everyone step back," he barked. "Give her air. Someone ring for an ambulance now." The villagers surged backwards in a flurry of muttering and speculation. Someone wailed that Felicity had been poisoned by Agatha's shepherd's pie, which immediately set off fresh shrieks. Agatha sprang to her feet, outraged. "My shepherd's pie wasn't anywhere near her wineglass," she shouted. "Well, she laughed at you," muttered a woman from behind the crowd. "So you have motive." "Oh, for heaven's sake," Agatha snapped, resisting the urge to hurl her handbag at the lot of them. Bill crouched beside Felicity, who was now barely conscious, her breaths ragged. He murmured something reassuring, though it was clear reassurance was more habit than belief. The siren of the approaching ambulance echoed across the lane. While others panicked, whispered, or speculated wildly, Agatha felt a cold thread of curiosity weave through her humiliation. Sickening events had a way of erasing social embarrassment. Already the shepherd's pie scandal had lost its bite, replaced by something darker. The paramedics arrived and lifted Felicity onto a stretcher. She was still conscious enough to moan faintly. The crowd closed in again, drawn by human nature's peculiar magnetism for disaster. Bill directed the paramedics, then turned back to Agatha, his expression grim. "This isn't natural," he said quietly. "I know the signs." Agatha swallowed, her thoughts racing ahead. Poison at a WI event. It was grotesque, shocking, and perversely interesting. A mystery dropped in her lap like a gift-wrapped apology for public humiliation. She lifted her cigarette again, though her hand trembled slightly this time. "Someone slipped her something," she murmured. Felicity was many things, but she didn't collapse from laughter. "Agatha," Bill said, stepping closer, "I need you to stay out of this." She raised an eyebrow. "Do you really?" His jaw tightened. "Yes, this could get messy." Agatha exhaled smoke into the night air, watching it curl away like a promise. She gave him a tight smile, half irritation, half defiance. Stay out of it? Naturally she wouldn't. Carsley woke under a cold, glassy sort of morning, the kind that made the hedgerows look oddly judgmental. Frost clung to the grass like an accusation, which seemed appropriate to Agatha. She woke with a thudding head and the unwelcome realization that the entire village had witnessed her culinary disgrace, followed immediately by Felicity Trimmings collapsing in a heap of poisoned drama. It was, she reflected grimly, not her finest evening. She shuffled downstairs, Hodge weaving between her ankles with imperial entitlement. He meowed once, which Agatha took as a criticism of her timing. Yes, breakfast," she muttered, opening a tin with more force than necessary. Hodge flicked his tail in mild rebuke. Agatha envied his ability to look dignified in all circumstances. The Mercester Messenger lay on her doormat, and Agatha's heart sank at the bold headline, "Mysterious Collapse at Wee Event," complete with a grainy photograph of the WI Hall and a blurred figure who could only be her, cigarette aloft like a torch of scandal. "Brilliant," she groaned. "Absolutely marvellous. Front-page mortification." By midday, the village was buzzing worse than a kettle left too long on the boil. Reporters prowled the lanes like hopeful foxes, sniffing for scraps. One even approached her garden gate before retreating under the full force of her glare. Almost on cue, the doorbell rang. Bill Wong stood outside, looking as if he'd had a night of broken sleep and lukewarm tea. His tie was askew, his patience already gone. "Morning, Agatha," he said, "or what's left of it." "Don't you start," she replied, stepping aside. "If one more person asks whether my shepherd's pie was lethal, I'll move to Timbuktu. Bill gave a weary sigh as he entered. Felicity's alive, but drifting in and out. Doctors think poison's likely. We're running tests. Agatha folded her arms. And here you are to tell me not to get involved. Exactly, he said. You were there. You noticed the glass. That's already too much. Agatha bristled. Noticed the glass because you were faffing about with parking cones. Someone had to use their brain. Bill pinched the bridge of his nose. Agatha, please, just leave this alone. Naturally, she had no intention of doing any such thing. By early afternoon, Charles Fraith arrived in his vintage convertible, scarf fluttering in a way that suggested he believed himself in a perfume advert. He leaned on his horn impatiently until Agatha stormed outside. Do you want the whole village to know you're here? She snapped. Darling, the whole village always knows I'm here, Charles drawled. Get in. We're going to inspect the lair of the fallen queen. Felicity's cottage? Agatha blinked. Since when did you become interested? Charles gave her a languid smile. Since you looked like you needed company. Also, I'm bored. They drove through the cold afternoon light to Felicity Trimmings's modern cottage on the edge of Mercester. It was aggressively fashionable, all polished chrome, white walls, glass vases, and magazines about diets that promised impossible miracles. The place screamed money, ambition, and someone polishing her image with military precision. Gareth Trimmings opened the door, pale and red-eyed. His jumper sagged at the shoulders, giving him the air of a man who'd slept badly and cared even less. Mr. Trimmings? Agatha asked gently. Yes, he said, voice wavering. Felicity's not, well. Charles offered a sympathetic nod while subtly peering over Gareth's shoulder at the spotless hallway. Agatha stepped forward. We're here to understand what happened last night, she said. We want to help. There's nothing to understand, Gareth insisted, wringing his hands. Felicity has no enemies. None at all. Agatha nearly snorted. Everyone has enemies, especially Felicity. She softened her tone. We're just looking around. Nothing official. Gareth hesitated, then stepped aside. They entered the pristine sitting room, where the sunlight fell across immaculate surfaces. Not a cushion out of place, not a crumb on the carpet. Agatha's eye landed first on the answering machine. Its red light blinked insistently. 32 saved messages. Does she often leave these? She asked. Gareth flushed. She liked to monitor things. She said deleting messages was sloppy. Agatha pressed the button before he could object. A series of sharp, agitated voices filled the room. Felicity had a knack for provoking people, it seemed. Half the messages were from WI members expressing annoyance about meeting schedules, lost forms, and one mysterious incident with the scones. The other half were complaints from people Agatha didn't recognize. No enemies, he says, Agatha murmured. She collected them like stamps. While Charles rifled through a basket of magazines labelled power salads, Agatha moved towards the mantelpiece. A WI trophy sat there, polished to a suspicious shine. The wood beneath was worn, the brass plaque was smudged in an odd way. Funny thing for a woman in hospital to polish, she said. She didn't dust this morning, Gareth mumbled. She's been busy. Busy blackmailing half the village, Agatha suggested sweetly. Gareth stiffened. That's unkind. Agatha caught the flash of guilt in his eyes. True, though. Charles, meanwhile, had drifted into the hall and struck up conversation with a neighbour who'd appeared at the gate. The neighbour, a trim woman with a floral scarf, lit up under his attention. Terribly shocking, she said breathlessly. Though I can't say I'm surprised. I saw Felicity arguing with someone 2 nights ago, down the lane near the hedge. Agatha leaned out. Someone? Who? Couldn't see properly, the woman said, but I thought it was another woman. Tallish, dark coat. They were shouting about something. Private. Agatha's interest sharpened. What time? Around 9:30. I was taking my dog out. Charles smiled charmingly, which earned him more details than Agatha would ever have extracted. Men, she thought crossly, had it far too easy. Back indoors, she continued her inspection. The kitchen was spotless. Too spotless. A faint citrus smell hung in the air. Fresh cleaning spray, she suspected, used with unusual enthusiasm. Gareth, she said suddenly, where were you last night? He blinked. Home, watching television, that's all. Anyone who can confirm? No, he muttered. Felicity was out. Charles sauntered back in. "Your neighbour is a fountain of information," he said, "and clearly lonely." "The argument?" Agatha pressed. "Oh, definitely heated. Lots of hand-waving, apparently. She thought someone was threatening Felicity, or it might have been Felicity threatening them." Agatha's mind whirred. An argument, a suspiciously polished trophy, a hoard of recorded grievances. If Felicity had been planning to cause trouble, someone might well have tried to stop her. She thanked Gareth, who was now trembling slightly. When they stepped back into the cold air, Agatha tightened her scarf around her neck. "So," Charles said, "our glamorous queen of salads was stirring the pot more than we knew." "She always did," Agatha replied, and someone finally snapped. Charles gave her a sidelong look. "Feeling triumphant? Your rival falls ill and suddenly you're Sherlock Holmes." "Don't be ridiculous," Agatha said, though a part of her did enjoy having the investigative upper hand again. "I'm concerned, deeply concerned." "About justice," Charles said. "About people thinking my shepherd's pie poisoned her," Agatha corrected. They drove back to Carsley, the cold afternoon hardening into evening. The village looked deceptively peaceful. Thin smoke from chimneys, neat gardens, soft kitchen lights. Ordinary life carrying on while something nasty coiled beneath. At home, Mrs. Bloxby appeared at Agatha's gate as if summoned by intuition. She held a small tin of biscuits, warmth in her eyes. "I heard you were involved last night," she said gently. "Are you all right?" "Perfectly fine," Agatha replied, too quickly. "Just trying to get to the bottom of things." Mrs. Bloxby tilted her head. "Try not to let pride guide you, Mrs. Raisin. These matters can turn sour when tempers mix with hurt feelings." Agatha shifted, annoyed by the accuracy of the remark. "Pride has nothing to do with it." "Of course not," Mrs. Bloxby said kindly, handing her the tin. "Do stay safe." Back inside, Hodge greeted her with a disdainful sniff before settling on the rug. Agatha poured herself a modest glass of wine, only one, she told herself, and sat by the fire as dusk filled the cottage. The phone rang. Agatha answered, expecting Charles. Bill's voice came through, strained. "Agatha, you need to leave this alone. Things are messy." He sounded worried, deeply worried. Agatha stared at the receiver long after the call ended, feeling a faint prickle of unease mingle with determination. Messy, yes, but she was already in it. Rain swept over Carsley in slick, slanting strokes that turned the lanes glossy and treacherous. Not a dramatic storm, just one of those persistent Cotswold showers that arrived without invitation and stayed out of sheer spite. Agatha Raisin marched along the pavement with her shopping bag knocking against her knee, muttering under her breath. 2 separate villagers had already asked whether she was recovering from the shepherd's pie incident, and one had inquired with painful sincerity whether she had intended to poison Felicity Trimmings. "If I had," Agatha snapped at the last offender, "I'd hardly use a supermarket pie." She regretted the remark instantly. It made her sound guilty and, worse, defensive. The rain trickled down her collar as she turned up Lilac Lane, wishing she had worn a hat rather than trying to preserve her hair with a scarf. Her heels clicked against the wet pavement, each step filled with the resentment of a woman who had absolutely had enough. When she reached her cottage, she noticed something wedged under the door. At first she thought it was a soggy takeaway leaflet. Then she tugged it free and saw the words, printed in a neat, deliberate hand, "Stop digging, or you'll be next." Agatha stared at it. Rain pattered against her shoulders, but she barely felt it. The note was crisp, despite the weather. Someone had placed it recently. Too recently. "Well," she muttered, stepping inside, "isn't that charming?" She slammed the door and marched to the phone. Her hand hovered for only a moment before she jabbed the buttons. Bill answered on the second ring. "Agatha, what's wrong?" "Get here now," she said sharply. "Someone's threatening me." His car pulled up 3 minutes later, tires splashing through puddles. Bill appeared at her gate, hair damp, jacket plastered to his shoulders, looking angrier than she had ever seen him without paperwork involved. "Let me see it," he said as soon as he stepped inside. Agatha handed him the note. Bill read it once, his jaw tightening. He read it again, slower. When he looked up, the calm professionalism had vanished. "This isn't a joke," he said. "You're now officially involved, and I don't want you near this case anymore." Agatha folded her arms. "Well, that's a pity, because I'm already knee-deep." "Agatha, Bill," she echoed in exactly his tone. He took a breath, visibly swallowing frustration. "It's dangerous. Whoever poisoned Felicity is scared. Scared people lash out. You should step back." "Nonsense, I'm making progress." "You're making trouble," he shot back. "There's a difference." Their eyes met, his filled with alarm, hers with stubborn fury. The air between them tightened until it felt like a third presence. "Agatha," he said quietly, "I don't want you hurt." Something shifted in her chest at the softness. She despised vulnerability, especially her own, so she lifted her chin briskly. "I've survived worse, usually without police assistance." Bill exhaled sharply. "At least promise me you'll stop questioning people." "I'm going to the WI hall," she replied, grabbing her handbag. "Does that answer your question?" "Agatha!" But she was already out the door. The WI hall was still faintly fragrant with last night's disastrous festivities. A few women pottered about stacking chairs, polishing tables, and gossiping with renewed enthusiasm. Rain drummed lightly against the windows, but the room was warm, buzzing, and eager for scandal. Doris Simpson spotted Agatha instantly and stiffened as if preparing for battle. "Ladies," Agatha said, advancing with purpose, "I need to speak with you." A small circle formed around her, part curiosity, part defense formation. WI members loved order, but loved gossip more. "We've all heard about poor Felicity," said Joan Tibby, whose timid voice quivered with anticipation. "Poor?" Agatha raised an eyebrow. "That's a generous word, considering how many toes she stepped on." Doris sniffed. "Felicity was spirited." "She was a menace," added another woman, adjusting her cardigan. "Stole my scone recipe and called it rustic." "She once told me my jam looked anemic," Joan whispered, looking traumatized. "She ruined my lemon drizzle in the summer competition," another chimed in. "Said it was texturally confused." Agatha nodded. "Exactly. So someone had reason to silence her. Any recent rows?" A ripple of discomfort passed through the circle. Doris glanced around nervously. "She may have had disagreements," Doris admitted, "with several people." "Oh, do share," Agatha said sweetly. They shared. Felicity, it seemed, had lived a surprisingly rich life of giving offence. She had stolen presentation ideas, sabotaged bakes, corrected grammar with malice, reduced Joan Tibby to tears during an argument about tablecloth colours, threatened to shake up the WI in ways no one trusted. She also said, Joan added timidly, that she was planning something big, a reveal, next month's meeting. Agatha's ears pricked. "A reveal of what?" Joan wrung her hands. "She didn't say, only that some people would be exposed. That was the word she used." A murmur of horror passed through the room. Exposed was a terrifying term in WI vocabulary, far worse than criticized. Doris folded her arms, defensive. "What are you getting at, Mrs. Raisin? You always think the worst." "Experience," said Agatha, "and survival instincts." Still, she left the hall more thoughtful than triumphant. Felicity had clearly been plotting a performance. Someone might have wanted to cancel it, permanently. The rain lightened into a mist as Agatha walked home, though the sky remained a dull pewter. Carsley's cottages glowed warmly behind their small front gardens. Curtains twitched as she passed. Villagers had an uncanny ability to track movements without ever stepping outside. She reached her gate, pushed it open, and stopped dead. Her bin was overturned, contents strewn like confetti across the driveway. Envelopes, apple cores, the cardboard sleeve from a microwave lasagna she prayed no one had seen. Rain had glued soggy paper to the gravel. Hodge, perched indignantly on the windowsill, looked as puffed up as a furious feather duster. "What on earth?" Agatha muttered. She hurried inside. Hodge voiced his outrage immediately, tail swollen to twice its normal width. Agatha scooped him up, feeling the faint tremble in his body. "Someone's been snooping," she murmured. "Little devils." She set him on the sofa, where he proceeded to stare at the door with theatrical suspicion. Agatha surveyed the cottage. Nothing obvious was disturbed, no drawers left open, no muddy footprints on the carpet. Whoever had broken in, or attempted to, knew how to avoid leaving a mess. But the bin outside, that was deliberate, a warning, a show of reach. Her throat tightened again, not with fear, but with fury. "They think they can frighten me," she said aloud, pacing the sitting room. "Threatening notes, ransacked bins. How original." Her answering machine clicked. She froze. The red light blinked. One new message. She pressed play. A distorted voice came through, low and muffled. "Stop now." Agatha's pulse jumped. She replayed it. The same hissed warning. No identifiable tone, no background noise. "Coward," she muttered. She poured herself a glass of wine. Just one, she insisted, and sat heavily in her armchair. The rain eased, leaving a faint hush across the village. The lamps cast a soft glow over the room, warming the corners. Hodge stretched across the arm of the chair, his tail curling toward her elbow as if offering reluctant reassurance. Agatha took a slow sip of wine. The day's events tangled inside her. Humiliation, threats, gossip, suspicion. She told herself she didn't care who had sent the note or overturned her bin. She told herself she had thicker skin than that. But as she stared into the quiet room, she knew the truth. She absolutely cared, and somebody in Carsley was about to regret underestimating her. A pale, watery sunlight pressed through Agatha's curtains the next morning, making a half-hearted attempt at cheer. It didn't improve her mood. She had slept badly, waking several times to check the cottage door and glare suspiciously at shadows. Hodge, who had no sympathy for human anxieties, stationed himself on her stomach at 5 a.m. and kneaded her ribs until she surrendered. She rose with a stiff back and a mind already racing. Someone in Carsley had threatened her. Someone had snooped around her cottage. Someone had poisoned Felicity Trimmings. And yet the only thing anyone seemed concerned about was the shepherd's pie debacle, which now felt insultingly minor. After a brisk tea and a half-hearted attempt at toast, Agatha rang Charles Fraith. "Charles, I need you," she said. "Ah," he replied, voice warm and self-satisfied. "Always a pleasure to hear." "Not like that. We're going to see Gareth Trimmings." Charles made a theatrical sigh. "Darling, must we? He strikes me as the sort of man who collapses under the weight of his own jumpers." "All the better," Agatha said. "He knows something. I want it." Charles arrived 10 minutes later in his vintage convertible, coat collar up, looking like a man stepping into a magazine shoot. He held 2 custard creams in a paper napkin. "I found biscuits," he announced. "An auspicious sign." "You're supposed to be my assistant, not my pantry scout." "Assistants require energy," he said loftily. "Mine comes from sugar." They drove to the Trimmings' cottage, which looked even more sterile in the cold morning light. Gareth opened the door hesitantly, eyes bloodshot, hair flattened on one side as if he'd slept on a newspaper. "Mrs. Raisin," he murmured, "and Mr. Fraith." Agatha pushed past him politely enough. "Gareth, we need to talk." "More questions?" Gareth asked, voice already trembling. "Yes, your wife was poisoned. Someone threatened me, and you have been behaving oddly. Consider this a community service." Charles slipped in behind her, already eyeing the side table for biscuits. Gareth noticed and winced as if bracing for shame. They settled in the sitting room, Agatha perched on the edge of the sofa, pen ready. Charles sprawled expansively in an armchair, nibbling the custard cream he'd brought himself. "Let's start with a simple question," Agatha said. "Where were you during the WI event?" Gareth's eyes darted. "Evesham Golf Club." "Really?" Agatha asked. "Doing what?" "Golfing." "Alone?" "No. Yes. Well, it was a business meeting." "Business meeting?" Agatha repeated, already suspicious. "I thought you said golfing." "I did golf," Gareth insisted, "before the meeting." "With whom?" He blinked rapidly. "Clients." "Names?" He opened his mouth, then closed it again. His hands twisted in his lap. "You're lying," Agatha said. Charles broke a biscuit in half, crumbs scattering across his trousers. "He's absolutely lying," Gareth swallowed hard. "All right, I wasn't golfing." Agatha leaned forward. "So where were you?" "I can't say." "Because you were with another woman?" Charles suggested. Gareth choked. "No." "Man," Charles offered, eyebrows arching mischievously. "Stop it," Agatha said, swatting him. She turned back to Gareth. "Why can't you say?" "I just can't," he whispered. Agatha studied him. Panic fluttered behind his eyes, but there was something else. Fear for someone else. Mrs. Bloxby's voice drifted through Agatha's mind. He might be protecting someone other than himself. Interesting. Before she could press further, the phone rang. Gareth flinched. Agatha watched him scramble to answer it, mumbling quiet reassurances. When he hung up, his face had turned grey. That was the hospital, he said. Felicity's unconscious again. A heavy silence followed. Even Charles stopped chewing for 3 whole seconds. Agatha said gently, "Whoever hurt her may try again. If you know something—" But Gareth shook his head violently. "I can't. Please leave." Agatha exchanged a look with Charles. Something wasn't right. Gareth was hiding something, but whether it was guilt, fear, or misguided loyalty, she couldn't yet tell. Back in Carsley, gossip moved swiftly. Agatha hadn't even reached her cottage before Doris Simpson intercepted her near the vicarage, voice lowered to a conspiratorial whisper. "Bill Wong interrogated Gareth this morning," she said. "A proper grilling." "How do you know?" Agatha asked. "Susan Jeffries saw him enter the station," Doris said proudly, "and the baker's nephew overheard Bill saying Gareth nearly cracked." Agatha raised an eyebrow. "Nearly?" "Well, that's the rumour," Doris said. "But I always say, where there's rumour, there's fire." "You mean smoke," Agatha corrected. Doris sniffed. "Not in this village." Agatha walked home feeling no closer to clarity. If Gareth had nearly confessed, why hold back now? What was he scared of, or who? At her gate, Mrs. Bloxby approached, hands folded serenely over her cardigan. "I hear you visited Gareth," she said. "Word travels fast." "Only when you're involved," Mrs. Bloxby said kindly. "Gareth is a troubled soul. He bends easily under pressure." "He bends?" Agatha repeated. "He practically folds." Mrs. Bloxby gave her a sympathetic look. "He may be protecting someone." Agatha felt a spark of satisfaction. "I thought so." "Just be careful," Mrs. Bloxby added. "People under stress make unpredictable choices." "So do I," Agatha said, "and usually better ones." Mrs. Bloxby smiled politely, which was her gentle way of saying that is absolutely untrue. Later that afternoon, Agatha waited for Bill in the police station like a furious queen awaiting tribute. She marched straight into his office without knocking. "Bill, I want an update," she declared. Bill looked worn out. Papers were scattered across his desk and his tea had gone cold. He rubbed his eyes. "Agatha, this isn't appropriate." "Neither is poisoning someone at a WI event," she shot back. "But here we are." Bill exhaled heavily. "Gareth gave conflicting statements again. He's all over the place, but nothing concrete, and he won't admit where he really was." "Because he's hiding something," Agatha insisted. "Yes," Bill said softly. "But I don't think it's murder." Agatha blinked. "You don't?" "No," Bill said. "There's fear in him, but not guilt. He's terrified for someone else." Agatha's pulse quickened. "Who?" Bill shook his head. "We don't know yet." She crossed her arms. "Well, I'm going to find out." "Agatha, for the love of heaven, stop interfering. I'm helping. You're complicating everything." "You need complicating," she said, warming to her argument. "You're all far too neat." Bill slammed his pen down. "Agatha, please, if anything happened to you—" He stopped. Agatha stared at him, startled. Something in his voice, raw, unguarded, hung in the room. Bill looked away sharply. Just let us handle this." Agatha opened her mouth but couldn't find a retort. Instead, she left quickly, feeling oddly flustered. The moment replayed in her mind as she marched down the station steps. Bill worried, truly worried, and vulnerability from Bill Wong always rattled her more than bullets or threats. She shook it off angrily. Emotional confusion was terribly inconvenient. By early evening, Agatha sat in her cottage living room with Charles lounging on her sofa, feet up, remote in hand. Hodge stared at Charles with profound disapproval. The phone rang. Agatha snatched it up. "Agatha, darling," Roy Silver's voice screeched through the line, thick with London drama. "I've heard the news. Poison. Hospital collapses. Honestly, you countryside people live more dangerously than Soho." "Roy," Agatha said, already exhausted, "what do you know?" "Only that Felicity was a terror in heels, and when terrors start dropping, it's always deeply provincial and therefore deeply dangerous." "Care to elaborate?" "No," Roy said smartly. "I simply want you to know I'm thinking of you, and if you die, I want your scarf collection." Agatha hung up on him. Charles stretched lazily. "Roy does have a point. It is dangerous." "We know it's dangerous," Agatha snapped. "That's why we're investigating." "We?" "You're my assistant." "I thought I was decorative," Charles mused. "Only occasionally." Hodge meowed in firm agreement. Agatha poured herself a modest glass of wine. Her first of the evening, she reminded herself, and leaned back. The clues tangled in her mind. Poison from bitter almond extract, a mysterious withdrawal of £3,000, Gareth's shifting alibis, Bill's unspoken fear. Someone in Carsley was hiding more than secrets. Charles looked over lazily. "What's our next move?" Agatha gazed at the fire, determination simmering beneath irritation. "We keep digging. Even after the threat. Especially after the threat." She lifted her glass, swirling the wine. Her reflection in the window looked older than she felt, but fiercer too. Let them try to scare her. Agatha Raisin did not back down. Not for villagers, not for poisoners, and absolutely not for threats shoved under her door. A mild, bright morning tiptoed over Carsley, the sort of deceptively cheerful day Agatha Raisin always distrusted. Sunshine glimmered on the Honeystone cottages as if the village were posing for a postcard, but Agatha knew better. Sunshine in Carsley usually meant one thing: villagers in a good enough mood to meddle. She stood at her cottage window, watching a pair of neighbours chatting far too eagerly across a hedge. Their faces held that unmistakable sparkle that meant gossip was fermenting like cider left in a too-warm pantry. Hodge leapt onto the sill beside her, tail swishing with regal boredom. "Don't look at me like that," she muttered. "If you'd been threatened twice in 24 hours, you'd be pacing too." Hodge blinked once, unimpressed. Agatha adjusted her coat and strode out, determined to dig deeper into Felicity Trimmings's past mischief. Sunshine or not, someone in the village had secrets to protect, and she intended to pry them loose. Her first stop was the vicarage. Joan Tibby lived in an annex nearby and greeted Agatha with the wary gaze of someone expecting interrogation. "Oh, Mrs. Raisin, I suppose you've come to ask about Felicity," she said, wringing her hands. "Correct," Agatha replied, "and I'd appreciate honesty. A rare commodity here, but let's try." Joan flushed pink. "Felicity wasn't very kind." "Understatement," Agatha said. "Start at the beginning." Joan hesitated, then sighed. "She blackmailed me." Agatha's eyebrows shot up. "About what?" Joan whispered. "She accused me of having an affair." Agatha examined the timid woman. Joan looked like she would blush if a postman complimented her dahlias. An affair seemed wildly unlikely. "With whom?" Agatha asked. "No one," Joan squeaked. "But Felicity found a letter addressed to me from a former work colleague. Perfectly innocent. She said she'd show my husband unless I supported her ideas at the WI. "And did you?" Joan nodded miserably. "Every single one. Even the terrible ones." Agatha gave a sympathetic snort. She held half the WI hostage with gossip, but someone must have pushed back. "Oh yes," Joan said eagerly. "Malcolm Jenkins refused to help when she demanded something. She threatened him too." Agatha smiled. An unhappy vicarage annex, a timid victim, and an overbearing tyrant. It was deliciously messy. She took mental notes and marched off before Joan could offer tea. Malcolm Jenkins lived in a fussy terraced house near the old bus stop. He opened the door with the look of a man expecting the tax office. "What is it now?" he grumbled. "Agatha Raisin," she said briskly. "I want to talk about Felicity Trimmings." Malcolm groaned. "I knew this day would come. Come in then, but mind the carpet." His sitting room smelled faintly of dust and ambition. Papers littered the table, stacks of handwritten numbers. Malcolm hovered anxiously as Agatha inspected the mess. "Felicity threatened to expose your dodgy bookkeeping, I hear," Agatha said. Malcolm waved a dismissive hand. "She didn't understand my system." Agatha picked up a notebook filled with rows of numbers and cryptic initials. "Looks like secret payments," she said, delighted at the thought of a breakthrough. Malcolm paled. "It's not, no. Don't be ridiculous." "Then prove it." Malcolm snatched the notebook, flipped to a page, and thrust it at her. "See? Fantasy football. That column is goals. That one's points. That one's team codes." Agatha frowned. "Fantasy football?" "Yes. The boys at the pub run a league. I keep the scores. It's harmless." She inspected the notebook again. Indeed, the pattern looked more like a sports obsession than criminal conspiracy. A perfectly good red herring gone soggy. "Fine," she muttered. "But what did Felicity want from you?" Malcolm shifted. "She said she knew something about my late wife's charity accounts. Nonsense, of course, but she kept threatening to reveal discrepancies." "Were there discrepancies?" Malcolm bristled. "Only if you count spelling errors." Agatha left with a sense of disappointment. Fantasy football was hardly motive for murder. Still, Malcolm's dislike of Felicity was palpable, and she tucked that away. Everyone in Carsley, it seemed, had a reason to despise the woman. Her third target was the village shop. The bell gave a weak jingle as Agatha entered. The shop assistant, a nervous girl with a fringe that looked self-cut, stiffened instantly. "Oh," she squeaked. "Mrs. Raisin." Agatha stepped forward with a smile meant to reassure, but which, on her, often resembled a threat. "I hear you overheard Felicity arguing with someone." The girl swallowed. "I didn't mean to eavesdrop, it's just, she was very loud." Felicity was incapable of being quiet, Agatha said. Who was she shouting at? "I don't know," the girl whispered. "A woman. I couldn't see her. They were outside the shop, arguing about a stolen idea." "What idea?" "I think a WI event theme. Felicity said she had proof someone stole it from her." Agatha's interest sharpened. Another grudge, another secret, and possibly another suspect. "That's all I heard," the girl added quickly. "Please don't tell anyone." "Of course not," Agatha said, knowing full well that Doris Simpson would drag the truth out eventually. She stepped outside feeling energized. 3 interviews, 3 motives, 3 new trails, all tangled, all promising. Carsley, she thought, was crawling with liars. Fortunately, she was very good at ferreting them out. She didn't make it 3 steps before Bill Wong appeared from around the corner, breathless and agitated. "Agatha!" she glared. "Why are you stalking me?" "I'm not stalking. Agatha, we need to talk." "If this is another lecture about interference, save your breath." Bill looked exasperated. "You can't keep interrogating people. They're witnesses." "They're villagers," Agatha corrected. "Witnesses are people you can trust. Villagers' life a sport." "Agatha," he paused, eyes dark with worry. "You're putting yourself at risk." She rolled her eyes. "You've said that." "No," he said quietly. "I'm begging you." The words stopped her cold. Bill Wong did not beg, not for anything. She stared at him. His expression was open, vulnerable, and deeply unsettling. "I'll be careful," she said, voice softer than intended. "That's not enough," he said. Agatha felt something twist in her chest, a mixture of affection, fear, and annoyance. Vulnerability from Bill was far more frightening than poison or threats. "You're overreacting," she muttered, though not convincingly. Bill shook his head. "Please, leave this alone." Agatha pursed her lips. She hated hearing "please" used like that. It made her feel cornered by concern. "I will not," she said simply, and she walked away quickly before her resolve betrayed her face. The afternoon light softened into a pale gold as Agatha returned home. The cottage felt strangely still, as if holding its breath. Hodge greeted her with a disdainful flick of the tail, then trotted off to inspect his food bowl. Agatha dropped her bag on the kitchen counter and reached for the kettle. She needed tea, not wine, if she wanted a clear head. As she waited for the boil, she noticed another envelope on the floor near the door. Her stomach tightened. She picked it up. No address, no stamp, just her name, written in the same neat, tidy hand as before. She opened it with a sense of dread she refused to acknowledge. "You've been warned, last chance." The letters were crisp, precise, almost elegant, completely at odds with their content. Agatha stood there, note trembling slightly in her fingers. Someone was escalating. Someone had been at her door again. Someone wanted her frightened. A spark of defiance ignited deep inside her. She folded the note, placed it deliberately in her desk drawer, and poured the boiling water over her tea bag with steady hands. "Last chance," she muttered. "Hardly." She carried her mug into the sitting room, where Hodge stretched luxuriously on the sofa, one paw extended toward the fire as if he owned the cottage, and perhaps she borrowed it. Agatha sank into the armchair, letting the heat of the mug warm her fingers. The cottage felt safe, cozy, and deceptively peaceful, a small domestic haven against a village full of secrets. Bill knew something big enough to scare him, and that was far more worrying than the notes themselves. Agatha watched Hodge raise his head and blink at her, the picture of feline indifference. "Don't look at me like that," she murmured. "I'm not quitting." She sipped her tea, feeling the warmth settle her nerves. One more threat wasn't going to stop her. In fact, it made her more determined than ever. The sun rose over Carsley in sharp, frosty clarity, scattering long, straight shadows across the lanes and honeystone cottages. A day like this could fool a stranger into thinking the village was peaceful, civilized, and wholly predictable. Agatha Raisin, wrapped in a thick scarf and her own simmering suspicion, knew better. Peace in Carsley was merely the interval before gossip turned malicious, and danger made an entrance wearing a smile. She stepped lightly over wet leaves and frost-crisp grass, the sharp air biting her cheeks. Hodge, perched indifferently on the sill of her front window, watched her leave with feline disapproval, tail twitching as though he understood both her brilliance and her foolishness. The hospital stood stark against the morning light, its brickwork bland and unwelcoming. Agatha approached briskly, scarf drawn high, hoping to remain unnoticed. Inside, the corridor smelled faintly of antiseptic and flowers someone had thoughtfully left by the window. Bill Wong was already there, moving quickly between the nurse's station and Felicity Trimmings's room. "Mrs. Raisin," he said sharply as he noticed her, "what are you doing here?" "Visiting," she replied innocently, lifting her chin. "Purely civic concern." "Civic concern," Bill repeated, eyebrows raised. He pinched the bridge of his nose. "You mustn't. It's dangerous." Agatha ignored the warning, moving past him. She slipped in quietly, keeping her scarf pulled low, just enough to suggest anonymity without resorting to full disguise. Felicity lay in the hospital bed, pale and wan, her breath shallow and uneven. One eye flickered open briefly, meeting Agatha's gaze. "Not him, not money. The book. Tell her." Her words were ragged, barely audible, carried on a whisper that seemed to vanish almost before it left her lips. Agatha leaned closer. "The book?" she asked. "Which book? What do you mean?" Felicity tried to gesture, pointing weakly toward the bedside table, then collapsed again. Her hand fell limply, and the shallow rise and fall of her chest reminded Agatha sharply that the situation was far from trivial. "Mrs. Raisin!" Bill barked, grabbing her arm. "Step back!" Agatha blinked at him, the irritation rising with her concern. "She tried to tell me something. The book." Bill's jaw stiffened. His eyes narrowed in that patient but firm way he had when he'd had enough of her interruptions. "I said step back. Now." Agatha stood frozen, her pride pricked by the urgency in his tone. This was no longer merely a case of curiosity. It was a question of timing, of danger, and of someone in Carsley who clearly wished harm on more than one person. She resented being restrained, but knew better than to argue in front of the nurse hovering nearby. Bill hustled her toward the door, voice low but tense. "Not now. I can't have you collapsing here too." Agatha glanced over her shoulder at Felicity, who lay still, eyes closed, yet somehow commanding attention even in weakness. A thought occurred to her. Someone had tried to communicate a secret, a key piece of the puzzle, and she had missed part of it. She clenched her fists in frustration. Back at Felicity's cottage, Agatha wasted no time removing the scarf that disguised her identity. Charles Fraith lounged in a chair as if he'd been appointed royal observer of chaos. Roy Silver's phone rang intermittently, his voice dramatic and theatrical even through the speaker. "Darling," Roy exclaimed, "I am calling from London. I hear things are utterly dire. Poison, hospitals, mystery. You simply must let me assist." Agatha's eye twitched. "Assist how?" "By adding glamour, flair, a little panache," Roy continued. "Danger, darling, demands dramatic intervention." "Fine," Agatha said tightly. "You may provide commentary only." Roy clapped his hands. "Delightful! I shall narrate with suitable gravitas." Agatha and Charles turned their attention to the cottage itself. Every surface gleamed unnaturally, suggesting someone had recently cleaned with the intent of erasing evidence. Agatha's instincts told her to look closer. She knelt by the bookcase, examining the gaps between volumes. "Ah," she said, "Felicity had secrets here." She tugged at a leather-bound notebook, dusty but intact. Its edges were worn from use. Opening it, she found meticulous entries, detailed criticisms of WI members, noting strengths and weaknesses in their presentations, records of petty blackmails, including stolen recipes, insults about tablecloths, and misappropriated raffle funds. A section titled Insurance Claims to Investigate, underlined several times. The last entry made Agatha's heart beat faster. Felicity had been investigating what looked like deliberate accidents, possibly staged for insurance payouts. Someone in Carsley was playing a long, dangerous game. Charles leaned over lazily, lifting a teacup with one finger. Interesting. A hobbyist with a spreadsheet fixation. Fascinating. Focus, Charles, Agatha snapped, scanning the pages. Each entry held potential motive, opportunity, and irritation rolled into one. Roy Silver's commentary exploded across the speaker. Darling, it's utterly scandalous. A woman reduced to hospital by clandestine bookkeeping and petty grievances, the very essence of provincial menace. Agatha ignored him. She moved to the sideboard, noticing a photograph half hidden behind a vase. It depicted a man meeting Felicity behind the WI hall. He was bending slightly as if examining something on the ground. Mud splattered his shoes and a toolbox sat beside him. "The culprit!" Roy cried dramatically. Agatha frowned. "Not quite." She examined it carefully. The man wore a plumber's uniform. He was there to fix a leak. Nothing more sinister. A perfectly plausible red herring. Charles stretched, indulging himself in a yawn. The excitement of investigative work is exhausting, even from an armchair. Agatha returned to the notebook, scrutinizing the insurance claims list. Each line had dates, locations, and brief notes on incidents that could have been accidents, or something more deliberate. She made mental notes, connecting this to Felicity's whispered words in the hospital. The book, tell her. Her pulse quickened. Whoever had wanted Felicity silenced, or merely frightened, might have returned here after her collapse. She glanced at the muddy boot prints near the back door. They weren't hers, Charles's, or Roy's. Someone had been in the cottage while they searched. "Someone's been here," she said quietly, eyes narrowing, after she collapsed. Charles looked alarmed, though he tried to mask it with aristocratic hauteur. Roy squealed over the line. "Oh, the plot thickens! Danger everywhere!" Agatha ignored them. She knelt, inspecting the prints. They were fresh, distinct in shape, but muddy enough to blend with the garden's soft earth. Whoever it was had been cautious but confident, leaving only enough trace to suggest a deliberate warning. She straightened. This is no longer just petty vengeance. It's calculated, and they are clever. Roy gasped audibly, as if he could hear the drama in his head. Calculated, clever. London would never manage such nuance, darling. Hodge, summoned by the tension, or perhaps the commotion, leapt gracefully onto the couch. He regarded the humans with a look that suggested mild disgust at their fussing. Agatha sipped a small glass of wine, letting it steady her hands. She allowed herself a single, precise observation. The village had layers she hadn't yet penetrated. Felicity's collapse, the threats, the notebook, and now the signs of a secondary intruder all suggested that Carsley's quaint surface concealed a sharp, deliberate edge. Charles draped himself across the armchair again. "So, who do we suspect?" "Everyone," Agatha muttered. "And no one." She frowned, considering the evidence. Felicity's blackmail notes implicated several villagers, but anyone could have used the staged accidents as a cover. The muddy footprints indicated a present threat. The notebook hinted at planning, not panic. "We need a strategy," she said, "before someone else gets hurt." Roy Silver's voice rose dramatically. "Darling, a strategy must be theatrical. Otherwise, how will they know we are formidable?" Agatha ignored him. Strategy, precision, observation, these were her weapons, not flair. She closed the notebook, eyes flicking to the window. The light was fading, shadows creeping over the garden. Carsley's cottages looked innocent, but she knew better. Beneath that innocence, someone had moved after Felicity collapsed. Someone had risked being seen or didn't care. "We need to keep watch," she said, "and record everything." Charles groaned, but took out a notepad. Roy Silver, still flaring from London, promised to narrate any suspicious movements as they occurred. Hodge curled on the sofa, utterly unbothered, but his alert gaze followed her. Agatha picked up her glass again, thinking of Felicity's whispered warning. The book, tell her. She repeated it quietly under her breath, feeling the weight of responsibility settle across her shoulders. The danger was immediate, the clues were tantalizing but incomplete, and Carsley's deceptive calm masked far more than she had anticipated. One thing, however, was clear. She would not be deterred. Someone in this village had secrets, and she intended to expose them all before they struck again. Dawn broke over Carsley in a brittle wash of silver and frost, the sort of light that made Honeystone cottages glint and puddles gleam deceptively. Agatha Raisin, still in her dressing gown and nursing a cup of lukewarm tea, was startled by a sharp knock at the door. It was far too early for the postman, and much too early for anyone civilized. "Bill?" she muttered, wrapping a shawl around her shoulders. Before she could protest, he pushed past, rain-spattered coat dripping onto her mat. His face was pale and tight, eyes sharper than she had ever seen. "Morning?" she said cautiously, measuring his exhaustion. "You look like you've been wrestling with a storm and lost." Bill ignored the jab. "Agatha, sit down, quickly." She perched on the edge of the sofa, hands clasped over her knees, heart thumping in expectation. He was unusually tense, vulnerable even. "Felicity's poison," he said, voice low, "was administered in a very specific quantity, precise enough to require chemical knowledge, not something a casual person would guess." Agatha's eyes narrowed. "Precise? You mean deliberately measured?" Bill nodded. "Exactly. The type of chemical knowledge only a few locals would have, someone with hobby experience or training." "And who might that be?" she asked, already suspecting the name. "Teresa Colville," he said, rubbing his forehead. "Quiet WI member, chemist by hobby, extremely private. She's cautious, clever." Agatha blinked. "You haven't brought her in?" Bill hesitated, running a hand through damp hair. "No, I didn't want to risk tipping her off. She's a lawyer's nightmare and can exploit any misstep. I can't have her discover procedural errors before we're ready." Agatha stared at him. Bill Wong bending rules? Bill Wong bending rules to protect an investigation? It felt like seeing a saint mislay his halo. "You mean," she said slowly, "you've come here, unannounced, and you haven't alerted her, because you're trying to avoid tipping her off?" "Exactly." His lips pressed into a thin line. "I didn't want anyone else knowing." Agatha felt a surge of astonishment mixed with a thrill. Bill Wong, meticulous and infuriatingly rule-bound, was improvising, and he was trusting her enough to be part of it. "Fine," she said, rising. "We'll visit her now." They drove through the crisp morning air, winding along lanes that glittered with frost. Hodge, left behind to sleep on the windowsill, would later regard her absence as a betrayal. Agatha ignored the mental scolding. There were more pressing matters. Someone had administered poison. Someone had threatened her. And now Teresa Colville might hold the key. Teresa's house stood tucked behind a row of lavender bushes, spilling a faint scent into the chilled air. Agatha knocked, and the door opened almost immediately. Teresa Colville, a woman with calm eyes and a faintly smug smile, regarded them with mild curiosity. "Mrs. Raisin, Mr. Wong," she said smoothly. "Do come in." The interior smelled strongly of lavender, books, and chemicals in subtle equilibrium. Beakers lined the windowsill, neat but lived in. Agatha's eyes flicked immediately to the windowsill. A tiny vial of bitter almond oil rested there, glinting in the morning sun. "You're early," Teresa said, motioning to 2 chairs. "I wasn't expecting visitors." Bill seated himself rigidly, eyes scanning. "Teresa, we need to discuss Felicity trimmings." Teresa tilted her head, expression serene. "Ah, Felicity. A rather lively presence, wasn't she?" "Teresa," Agatha said sharply. "She threatened you, didn't she?" "Only once," Teresa replied. "She claimed she knew about my handling of parish funds. I assured her she was mistaken." "And she believed you?" Agatha asked. "Partially. She enjoyed being dramatic." Agatha's eyes swept the room. Everything seemed in order, but subtle clues betrayed activity. A faint burn mark on Teresa's thumb, a torn page from an appointment diary matching entries in Felicity's cottage ledger, and the bitter almond oil. "Tell us about this," Agatha said, pointing at the oil. Teresa shrugged, almost smugly. "It's for experiments, purely recreational chemistry." "Experiments that require precision," Bill said, his voice low, enough to produce the poison used on Felicity. Teresa's lips twitched. "Poison? I never touch poison, just essential oils." Agatha exchanged a glance with Bill. Every detail fit a pattern, yet something didn't. The torn diary page aligned with Felicity's notes. The oil smelled bitter, but Teresa's calm demeanor suggested knowledge without malice. "Were you near the WI hall when she collapsed?" Agatha asked. "No," Teresa said, hands folded. "I was at the chemist's shop in Moreton-in-Marsh. CCTV would confirm it." Agatha frowned. A perfectly plausible alibi. But why the page? Why the oil? The puzzle deepened. CCTV? Bill's brow furrowed. She can't. That's inconvenient. Teresa's tone remained polite, neutral. I said I was there. You may check. Agatha made a mental note. She needed to verify this, but it wasn't immediate. Her mind raced across Felicity's diary, the insurance claims, the notebook entries, and Teresa's subtle indicators. Someone was manipulating events, and Teresa might only be the next layer, or a carefully placed distraction. Charles Fraith, lounging in a corner, lifted a brow. Delightful domestic science, darling. Nothing like a tidy chemist to keep a village on its toes. Agatha ignored him. Roy Silver, calling from London, added his dramatic voice through the speakerphone. Darling, the intrigue thickens. Poison, threats, alibis. Where is the thrill if we can't feel the danger? Roy, you're not helping, Agatha muttered. She turned back to the subtle clues. Bitter almond oil, torn diary page, burn mark, precise chemical knowledge, but a verifiable alibi. Teresa might be telling the truth, or lying brilliantly. Bill leaned back, pinching the bridge of his nose. Someone's playing us, he muttered. And they're close. Agatha's lips pressed together. He didn't need to elaborate. She understood perfectly. Someone had orchestrated Felicity's collapse, manipulated her investigation, and now used misinformation to divert attention. Do we trust her? Agatha asked. Bill shook his head slightly. Not completely, but she's cautious, clever, dangerous in her own quiet way. Agatha's fingers tapped the edge of the notebook she had brought along. Dangerous in her own quiet way. That sounded entirely like someone she had met before in Carsley, or someone about to reveal themselves. Teresa, meanwhile, smiled faintly, noticing the tension. I suppose I appear incriminating, but I assure you I had nothing to do with Felicity's misfortune. Agatha studied her, noticing the subtle burn on the thumb again. It could be innocent, a candle, an experiment gone slightly wrong, or it could mark preparation. You'll need to remain available, Bill said finally. If your alibi is verified, fine, but we may call you again. Teresa inclined her head gracefully. Of course, I understand. Agatha stood, straightening her coat. She felt the familiar rush of certainty and irritation. Someone was manipulating the village, threatening lives, and leaving her to untangle the threads. Teresa might be key, or a clever diversion. Either way, the investigation had narrowed to fewer possibilities, but with greater peril. As they left, Agatha's mind raced. Muddy prints in Felicity's cottage, diary pages, bitter almond oil. Each detail now seemed part of a deliberate pattern, and someone was watching, waiting for the next misstep. Back in the car, Charles sprawled in the passenger seat, a cushion under his arm. Darling, you do realize that sniffing out chemists makes you frightfully admirable. Agatha ignored him. She was thinking too fast for compliments. Roy Silver's commentary over the phone reminded her vaguely of a wind-up toy, shrill but not helpful. Someone returned to the cottage while we searched, she said quietly, almost to herself. Muddy boots, subtle enough not to notice immediately. Bill's hand tightened on the steering wheel. Exactly. Someone is close. Agatha exhaled slowly, feeling the firelight of determination kindle in her chest. They were running out of mistakes to make. Whoever Felicity had angered or uncovered was clever, patient, and dangerously close. Hodge, waiting at her cottage, greeted her with a pointed meow, tail flicking. Agatha bent to scratch him behind the ears. Even he seemed to understand the gravity of the situation. We have to stay ahead, she murmured, or someone else will pay the price. Bill's eyes met hers in the rearview mirror. No words passed, but the understanding was clear. The line between rules and necessity had blurred, and Carsley's quaint facade hid a far more ruthless reality. Agatha Raisin naturally would not back down. The game had sharpened, the players were fewer, the stakes higher, and someone had returned to the scene while they were distracted. The village was closing in. Fog rolled over Carsley like a well-rehearsed actor, soft and deliberate, blurring hedgerows and cottages in a pale silver haze. Agatha Raisin moved along the lane from the Red Lion, coat collar high, scarf wrapped tight, and boots clicking on damp stones. The warmth of the pub still lingered in her chest, ginger beer and roast, plus the satisfaction of irritating Charles Fraith with her latest theory, but irritation hadn't faded entirely. Really, Charles had said, lounging in the passenger seat of her borrowed car. "Do you imagine everyone in this village is plotting elaborate schemes? It's a hamlet, not Manhattan." Agatha's eyes had narrowed so sharply they could have sliced a loaf of bread. "Charles, small places conceal the biggest vanities." "Vanities, yes," he said smugly. "But murders? And poisons? Do you realize how melodramatic that sounds?" "Melodramatic, yes," Agatha muttered, "but also accurate." The fog thickened as she walked, muffling her footsteps and painting the familiar lane with the eerie charm of a period drama. Hedges seemed closer, their tips dripping with dew that reflected the pale lamplight. She pulled her scarf tighter and allowed herself the small satisfaction of imagining a villain lurking in the mist, the very embodiment of Castley's clandestine menace. Halfway down the lane, her mood sharpened. Footsteps, soft but deliberate, echoed behind her. Agatha stiffened. Someone was following. She quickened her pace. Footsteps quickened. "Show yourself!" she hissed, swinging her bag in warning, though she suspected no one would comply. The footsteps accelerated. Heart hammering, she spun around and felt a sudden shove against her shoulder. She fell hard, arms scraping against the rough stone of a garden wall. Pain lanced up her forearm as she scrambled to her feet. The shadow was already retreating, melting into the fog as if it had never been. "Coward," she muttered through gritted teeth, pressing a hand to the graze. "A frightful coward." Minutes later, a familiar voice cut through the fog. "Mrs. Raisin!" Bill Wong arrived in a patrol car, his coat damp and hair plastered, breath visible in the cold night. His expression was tight, a mixture of concern and barely contained anger. "Someone called it in," he said. "Anonymous tip." "Lucky someone did," Agatha said, limping slightly. "Or I'd have been a second Felicity." Bill ignored her quip. He was unusually tense, hands gripping the car door as if to anchor himself. "This changes everything," he said quietly. "For tonight, you are not walking alone. Not ever. I mean it." Agatha bristled. "I will walk wherever I like." He didn't reply immediately. Instead, he pressed a button on his radio. A patrol car's headlights appeared faintly in the fog behind them. "Park outside your cottage. Officers report only to me. No paperwork, no log, no fuss." Agatha blinked. The world felt subtly off balance. Bill Wong, bending rules. For her. Her chest warmed for a moment, a dangerous, fluttering sensation she had no intention of acknowledging. "Touched," she muttered under her breath. Then, seconds later, she was furious. And angry at being touched. Bill stared at her, unreadable. "Forget the emotion. Focus. Safety first." Agatha gave a stiff nod. They drove back slowly, scanning the lane, eyes straining through fog and darkness. The shoving attack had been messy, opportunistic, a sign of fear rather than planning. Whoever it had been lacked Felicity's precision or Teresa Colville's meticulous care. She noted the mud on her boots and coat clasp, glancing at the gate latch. A flash of recognition. The earth-stained metal matched mud she had seen in Felicity's garden. Someone had been there recently and now targeted her. "Do you see this?" she said, pointing. Bill crouched, inspecting the latch. "Yes," he muttered, careless, but revealing. Not the mind of a careful poisoner. Too much haste, too much panic. Agatha nodded. She liked having details others overlooked. Small inconsistencies spoke volumes, more than confessions or alibis. Arriving at her cottage, Agatha unlocked the door slowly, letting the fog swirl behind them. Hodge was waiting in his usual seat, tail flicking with an expression that could only be interpreted as judgmental. He jumped onto the armchair, regarding them like the sofa itself had been trespassed upon. Agatha breathed deeply, letting the warm domestic smells, burnt toast from breakfast, faint traces of tea, calm her. She had survived threats, poisonings, and now a direct attack, all before 8 p.m. "I'll check inside," Bill said. He moved methodically, eyes sweeping every corner. Agatha's arm still throbbed from the shove. Her pride hurt more than her flesh. "Don't underestimate him," she muttered to Hodge, who yawned in reply. The cat's apathy was comforting. Inside, the cottage was undisturbed, though the shadow of intrusion lingered in the subtle impressions on the carpet. Agatha noticed minor scuff marks near the door, and the faint aroma of wet earth carried from outside. The intruder had fled hastily, leaving a story in their wake. Bill's voice came quietly, urgent yet calm. "Agatha, You mustn't walk alone anymore. Not until we identify who did this. Agatha felt the irritation flare hot in her chest. I will walk wherever I please, she said again, ignoring the protest in her tone. She set down her bag, trying to steady herself. Then exhaustion and shock collided. Her vision blurred. Legs wobbling, she sank slowly onto the nearest chair. Her hands gripped the armrests and the room tilted slightly as adrenaline drained away. Hodge, ever the critic, hopped lightly onto the armchair beside her. His weight pressed against her arm like a judgmental cushion. She looked into his calm eyes and, despite herself, she felt absurdly comforted. I survive every mortifying occasion in this village, she muttered softly. And still, her words trailed off. The warmth of her cottage, the presence of Hodge, and the thought of Bill Wong bending every rule he had ever sworn to uphold, all of it collided into a single, dizzying cocktail. She closed her eyes briefly, breathing in the faint lavender scent from a vase on the mantel. Outside, the patrol car remained stationed as ordered, headlights slicing through the fog. Agatha felt the sharp edge of fear, but it was tempered by something else, determination. Whoever had shoved her, whoever was muddying the cottages and sending threats, was not going to dictate the rhythm of her life. She would walk, she would investigate, and she would untangle this web. She opened her eyes, meeting Hodge's gaze. He twitched his tail once, disapprovingly. She nodded, wordless but comprehended. Action was necessary. Bill's words replayed in her mind. Someone is close. Someone had been in Felicity's garden. Someone had followed her. Someone had chosen this moment to threaten her. And yet, despite the near attack, despite adrenaline and bruises, she felt a flush of satisfaction. She was in the thick of it, and she was far from helpless. We'll find them, she said aloud, almost defiantly, and they'll regret it. The house remained quiet, warm, and deceptively safe. Hodge sprawled across the armchair, one paw dangling as if keeping silent vigil. Agatha straightened in her seat, allowing herself a small sip of tea. The fog outside thickened slightly, hiding paths and secrets alike, but inside her cottage she had clarity for the first time that evening. Danger lingered, yes. Threats had escalated, but she, Agatha Raisin, was alert, prepared, and thoroughly unwilling to be intimidated. The night stretched ahead, long and uncertain, yet for the first time she felt ready. And Hodge, judging silently from the armchair, seemed to agree. In Carsley Lane, shadows shifted, mist swirled, but inside the cottage warmth and resolve held sway. Agatha Raisin would walk the lanes again, and next time she would be ready. A blustery wind rattled through Carsley that morning, bending hedgerows and sending stray leaves skittering across the lane. The sort of wind that whispered mischief, reminding everyone in the village that appearances were deceiving and quiet cottages could harbour secrets. Agatha Raisin, hair mussed and scarf barely clinging in place, was sipping strong tea by her kitchen window when a knock echoed sharply at the front door. Before she could summon a polite greeting, the door swung open to reveal Gareth Trimmings. He was shaking, his face pale and eyes wide, and he smelled faintly of whiskey, enough to make the hairs on the back of her neck rise. "Mrs. Raisin," he stammered, words tumbling over one another. I killed her." Agatha's spoon hovered above her teacup. Tea splashed a little as she blinked at him. "Excuse me?" she asked carefully, trying to gauge whether he had lost his mind or whether he truly meant what he said. Felicity, I killed her," he repeated, almost whispering, the words slurred but raw with panic. His hands trembled. Agatha's instincts kicked in faster than her disbelief. She grabbed her coat and bag. "Stay put, I'm calling Bill." By the time she had summoned Bill Wong, Gareth had collapsed into a chair, trembling as if he might crumble entirely. Bill arrived, hair damp from the wind, coat unbuttoned, and eyes narrowing instantly. "Gareth," Bill said briskly, kneeling in front of him, "what are you talking about?" "I killed her," Gareth repeated, voice cracking. "I didn't mean to, I swear." Agatha pinched the bridge of her nose. This was typical Carsley drama, emotion outpacing logic by several miles. "You didn't kill her," Bill said firmly. "Explain." Gareth gulped, eyes darting between them. She said she was leaving me. Threatened to expose everything. I wanted her gone." Bill's expression hardened, then softened, then hardened again. "You wished her dead. That is not the same as murder. Clarify." "I didn't touch her. I said it," Gareth admitted, voice small. "I wanted her out, that's all." Agatha let out a long breath she hadn't realized she was holding. The drama deflated slightly, yet buried beneath his shameful confession, a crucial hint emerged. She told me, Gareth continued in a trembling murmur, that she had uncovered a criminal scheme, someone respected in Carsley. I didn't know what it was, but she made me swear not to tell anyone. Agatha's mind sharpened. Respectable? Criminal scheme? Someone whose polite smile hid far darker intentions. Bill's brow furrowed. Do you remember who? Gareth shook his head miserably. No, she wouldn't say, only that it involved the church, the WI, money, something serious. Agatha's pulse quickened. This was the break they had needed, the angle that linked Felicity's notebook to a real threat, not just village pettiness. Thank you, she said softly. Try to rest. Don't. She trailed off, knowing full well Gareth might not rest a wink until he revealed every morsel of information he possessed. Once Bill ensured Gareth was stable, Agatha didn't linger. She pulled her coat tighter and headed for the vicarage. Mrs. Blocksby greeted her with calm serenity, hands folded neatly over her cardigan. Mrs. Blocksby, Agatha began, breathless. Felicity mentioned a criminal scheme involving someone respected. Does that ring any bells? Mrs. Blocksby regarded her thoughtfully. Felicity once tried to blackmail a member of the WI over church charity funds, she said carefully. It was delicate. She threatened to reveal misuse unless certain funds were accounted for properly. Agatha's mind spun with connections. A notebook, a whisper, the sketch of broken teacups she had noticed in Felicity's records. It all began to converge. The broken teacup symbol, she said, leaning forward. It appeared next to several names in her notes. Mrs. Blocksby's eyes flickered. Yes, it was the WI's private code during disputes. Tiny sketches, usually a teacup, occasionally broken, to mark disagreements or potential sanctions. Agatha's heartbeat quickened. If she decoded the pattern, she could narrow down suspects to a very manageable list. Teresa Colville, Malcolm Jenkins, Joan Tibby, all had motives, opportunities and connections. And a fourth, Mrs. Blocksby added softly. There was a name, crossed out violently. I never asked who it was, but Felicity certainly intended it to be hidden. Agatha exhaled, feeling the first tight coil of determination since the threats began. The mystery was no longer abstract. It had faces, symbols, and subtle signatures pointing toward someone real. She raced back to the cottage to gather Felicity's notebook and review her own notes. Charles Fraith lounged in the armchair, feigning casual boredom. Darling, he murmured lazily, you look as though you've swallowed a thunderstorm. Focus, Charles, Agatha said sharply. We have suspects and clues. Yes, he replied, stretching his legs. I shall be supportive while remaining aesthetically unobtrusive. Agatha ignored him. She opened the notebook, scanning every detail, the tiny sketches of broken teacups standing out like warnings. Each crossmark, each notation, each smudge of ink signified a tension, a petty grudge, or a threat to someone's reputation. And now, Gareth's panicked confession added weight. Felicity had been dangerously close to uncovering something larger than village gossip. Bill arrived shortly, walking briskly up the lane, expression tight and voice clipped. Agatha, stay here, he commanded. You mustn't interfere. Bill, stop worrying, she said. I'm far more careful than you think. He exhaled, frustration and concern entwined. No, you're reckless. You're a target. Felicity is injured, someone is escalating, and now you're in the thick of it. I'm aware, she said evenly, and I'm not leaving it to you alone. He opened his mouth to respond, but stopped, the words lost in the tension between them. She stared at him, sensing the unsaid. He cared far more than he admitted. Agatha turned her attention back to the notebook. One name had been crossed out violently. Who could it be? She traced the symbol again, noting the faint ink smudge where Felicity had scribbled in haste. Every clue pointed to a narrow circle, yet the missing identity made the net incomplete. Teresa Colville, Agatha murmured, eyes narrowing. Bitter almond oil, chemical skill, check. Malcolm Jenkins, she continued, scanning the ledger. Fantasy football, petty disputes, potential misdirection. Joan Tibby, she said, sighing. Emotional, easily intimidated, plausible but unpredictable. And the fourth? Crossed out, erased, hidden deliberately. Whoever it was, they had reason to remain secret, perhaps the most dangerous element of all. A sudden ringing of her phone broke her focus. It was Bill, voice urgent. "Agatha, hospital, Felicity, she's—" Agatha froze mid-breath. "Dead," he said quietly. "She didn't make it. The poison, the complications it was too much." Shock hit her in waves. Her hands trembled as she gripped the notebook tighter. Felicity, whose schemes, gossip, and threats had dominated the village for weeks, was gone. Murder had been confirmed. Bill's words hung between them. "Agatha, you need to be careful. Whoever did this is dangerous. They know you're involved." She clenched her jaw. "I am careful enough. I am always careful enough." Yet inside she felt the sharp sting of vulnerability, the recognition that the game had changed. This was no longer about threats or intimidation. Someone had escalated to murder. Someone in Carsley had committed homicide, and the hints, clues, and symbols all pointed closer to home than anyone dared suspect. Hodge leapt onto her lap, tail flicking, eyes alert. Agatha scratched him behind the ears. The cat's calm, disdainful presence grounded her more than any reassurance could. She leaned back, notebook open, wind from the foggy lane slipping through a slightly open window, carrying the faint scent of autumn leaves. Carsley was no longer a village of petty grievances and gossip. It was a village hiding a murderer, and she, naturally, would be in the middle of it. Carsley woke under a crisp, pale morning that offered the illusion of calm. The Honeystone cottages gleamed in weak sunlight, the mist from overnight dew lifting reluctantly, curling around hedgerows and lane fences. Agatha Raisin stood by her kitchen window, staring out at the deceptively serene village. The news had arrived with a cruel, understated punch. Felicity Trimmings had died in hospital overnight. Her hands clenched the edge of the counter, fingers tight around the chipped china of her teacup. Hodge, sensing tension, had leapt onto the windowsill, tail twitching and gaze focused on her in that precise, feline, judgmental way. Agatha drew in a shuddering breath. She had survived threats, poison, and even a direct shove in the fog. But death brought a different gravity, and the village had become far more dangerous overnight. A sharp knock at the door broke her reverie. Bill Wong entered, coat damp and hair dishevelled from the morning fog. His face was tense, eyes unusually guarded. "Agatha," he began, and his voice carried the weight of both concern and hesitation. "I need to tell you something I haven't said yet." She set her cup down, heart quickening. "If it's another stay out of danger lecture, I'm not listening." Bill ignored the half-scolding tone. "I withheld evidence." Agatha's eyebrows shot up. "Withheld evidence? What?" "A shred of paper," Bill continued, voice low, "found in Felicity's handbag. Your name is written next to a broken teacup symbol." The words hit her like a bucket of cold water. She staggered back slightly, clutching the windowsill. Her name. A symbol denoting dispute, mockery, or punishment. Felicity had been planning to expose her at the next WI meeting, likely for some absurd reason, perhaps the shepherd's pie fiasco that had humiliated her days before. You didn't tell me?" Agatha asked, voice sharp with incredulity, anger, and the tiniest flicker of something warmer, oddly, almost pride. "I hid it," Bill said simply, "so you wouldn't be targeted by gossip, or listed as a suspect. You were already a target, Agatha. I couldn't let it escalate." Her mouth opened, then closed, then opened again. Shock, fury, a touch of gratitude that made her stomach twist. He had broken every protocol he had ever sworn to uphold, bending the rules just to shield her. I can't believe you," she muttered, pacing. Furious, and oddly touched. Bill's expression softened slightly, but he didn't respond verbally. Agatha could practically see him willing her to calm down. She ignored the subtle appeal. "We need to sort through the notebook," she said abruptly, regaining focus. "Now." Charles Fraith lounged in the corner, one leg crossed over the other, hands clasped behind his head. Roy Silver's phone rang periodically, the sound overly dramatic for the tension in the room. Mrs. Bloxby had arrived shortly after Bill, calm and composed, carrying an aura of reassurance like a small, portable fire. Together they dissected the notebook. Pages were covered in meticulous handwriting, symbols marking petty grievances, disagreements, and potential punishments within the WI. The broken teacup symbol appeared multiple times. Some names had it once, some twice. One name had been crossed out violently, Teresa Colville, once. Another time it remained. "Teresa," Agatha murmured, leaning close to examine the ink. "You're showing up everywhere. Every clue, every conflict, every subtle threat. You're central." "Indeed," Mrs. Bloxby said quietly. "Felicity once accused her of mismanaging the church charity funds. She would have resented exposure." Agatha nodded, thoughts racing. Teresa's calm exterior had masked a clever, careful mind, and now, with Felicity gone, the risk of further mischief had escalated. "We need to visit her again," Agatha said resolutely. "She's hiding something. I can feel it." The group arrived at Teresa's house mid-afternoon. Sunlight glinted off frost-mottled windows, revealing an ordinary cottage with no outward sign of malice. Agatha's eyes, however, scanned every shadow, every curtain fold, every glimmer of light for subtle hints of deceit. Teresa greeted them with her characteristic composure, offering polite smiles that did little to mask the tension in her stance. "Mrs. Raisin, Mr. Wong," she said, voice calm. "I assume this visit is about Felicity." "Correct," Agatha replied, forcing her calm. "We'd like to examine a few things." Teresa's brow flickered. "Of course," she said, though her smile tightened fractionally. Agatha's gaze swept the room. The faint scent of lavender mingled with something chemical, subtle but noticeable. Then her eyes caught a hint of movement beneath a rug. Kneeling, she lifted it carefully and revealed a stash of old WI account books. She picked them up, flipping through them quickly, noting discrepancies and hidden annotations. "Interesting," she murmured. "Why hide these?" Teresa's hands clutched the edge of a countertop, knuckles white. These are merely records. Administrative." Agatha's eyes flicked to the sink. A teacup sat there, remarkably similar to those used at the WI hall, marked faintly with traces of lipstick or tea stains. She raised an eyebrow. "And your Burns kit," she added, noting a small drawer ajar, its contents incomplete. Several items were missing. Teresa's eyes widened. I can explain." Agatha's voice sharpened. "Go ahead." Teresa bolted. Agatha reacted immediately, sprinting across the muddy garden. Boots sank into the earth. Her skirt clung to her legs with damp grime. Behind her, Charles's car blocked the lane, engine idling and lights bright. Roy's dramatic narrations exploded from the phone, shouting theatrically about the chase and danger. Teresa stumbled across the field, arms flailing slightly, panic evident in every step. Agatha's breath burned in her chest, heart racing, but she pressed on, fueled by frustration and determination. Charles maneuvered his vintage convertible to cut off escape routes, tires crunching over frozen leaves. Bill arrived moments later, calm but commanding, to prevent Teresa from fleeing further. Cornered, Teresa faltered. She sank to her knees, hands covering her face, trembling. Agatha approached cautiously, boots squelching in mud. "Teresa," she said softly, "you've been hiding something but not murder. Is that correct?" Teresa looked up, eyes wide, voice cracking. "Yes, I didn't. I swear. I didn't harm Felicity." Agatha studied her, noting every micro-expression, the quivering lips, the tension in her shoulders, the genuine fear in her gaze. Guilty, yes, but not the murderer. Bill stepped forward, a resting presence firm but restrained. "Teresa, you need to come with us for questioning, but understand this. Your involvement is limited to administrative misdeeds, nothing beyond that." Agatha let her eyes wander over the scene. Charles, Roy, Bill, Teresa, the muddy field, and the faint sunlight glinting off frost-laden hedgerows. Hodge would have been unimpressed. She exhaled slowly, feeling a mixture of relief, irritation, and unresolved curiosity. The murderer remained unknown, and one crucial piece of the puzzle was still missing. "Bill," she whispered quietly, almost to herself as Teresa was escorted away, "we're still missing someone." He looked at her, silent for a moment. Agatha could read the unspoken agreement between them. The hunt was far from over, and Carsley still held its secrets tight. Hodge leapt onto the armchair, tail flicking judgmentally. Agatha sank beside him, picking up her teacup, allowing herself a brief sip. Mud clung to her shoes, her skirt and her pride, but she felt alive in the most infuriatingly satisfying way. The wind rattled the window panes, whispering promises of further revelations. Agatha stared out into the lanes, the village calm again on the surface but vibrating with concealed truths. She lit a cigarette carefully, inhaling slowly. The smoke curled, almost in mockery of the chaos still unfolding. "I will find them," she murmured, voice soft but resolute. "Whoever it is, I will find them." Hodge yawned, tail flicking in silent approval. The village was quiet, but danger lingered, and Agatha Raisin was ready to meet it head-on. A biting wind swept across Castley Green, rattling the lampposts and sending brittle leaves scuttling across the cobbles. Agatha Raisin pulled her coat tighter, scarf wrapped twice around her neck, boots crunching over frost-hardened earth. The village seemed deceptively quiet, the sort of calm that whispered danger, the sort that made her fingertips itch with curiosity. Back in her cottage, Agatha hunched over Felicity's notebook again, the pages worn from relentless study. Every line, every tiny sketch of a broken teacup, and every cryptic annotation now carried the weight of lives at stake. She flipped through to the list headed, "Insurance Claims to Investigate." Her eyes narrowed. The names there were familiar, almost innocuous at first glance, but repeated cross-referencing with parish newsletters and accident reports revealed a sinister pattern. One name recurred again and again: Malcolm Jenkins. The mild-mannered shopkeeper and part-time accountant had appeared at multiple accidents, always in close proximity, always tangentially involved. Agatha's mind raced. Could he really be capable of something as deliberate as poisoning Felicity? And yet, everything pointed him out. The insurance claims, Felicity's notebook, the subtle chemical traces from Teresa Colville's supplies. She marched briskly down the lane to Malcolm's small shop. The bell above the door jingled faintly as she entered, a sound that had always suggested gentle civility but now felt ominous. Malcolm looked up, startled, a bag of groceries half emptied on the counter. "Mr. Jenkins," she said, keeping her tone deceptively light, "we need a chat." "Mrs. Raisin," he stammered, eyes darting, What's this about?" Agatha ignored the feigned innocence. "About Felicity, about the accidents, about the notebook." Malcolm's face paled, lips pressing tight. "I don't know what you mean," he said, voice low, unconvincing. "Really?" she said, stepping closer. "Because according to your parish newsletters and Felicity's meticulous records, you've been very, very busy staging accidents, collecting insurance payouts, and Felicity found out." The words hit like stones. Malcolm's eyes flickered, guilt mingling with panic. It wasn't meant to go that far," he said finally, voice breaking. "I only wanted a few small claims. Felicity, she demanded a cut." "A cut?" Agatha repeated, incredulous. "Yes!" Malcolm shouted, flinching as the counter trembled under his hands. "I panicked. She threatened exposure. I didn't mean her any real harm." Agatha's pulse quickened. Every detail clicked into place. The use of Teresa's chemistry supplies, which he had borrowed months ago under the guise of curiosity, the poisoned wine at the WI event, the threat notes, even the shove in the foggy lane. It all led back to him. "And you tried to scare me off," she said quietly, meeting his gaze, "because I asked too many questions." Malcolm hesitated, then snapped, the facade of civility dropping completely. He lunged at her, fists raised, desperation in his eyes. Agatha stumbled backward, feet slipping in the mud outside his shop, her skirt catching on a fence post. "Malcolm!" a familiar voice shouted. Bill Wong appeared from the side lane, breath visible in the cold air, eyes blazing with authority and concern. Without hesitation, he tackled Malcolm to the ground. The struggle was brief, controlled and firm. Malcolm squirmed, flailing, but Bill's grip never wavered. "You're under arrest," Bill said, voice steady, hand securing the man's arms, "for Felicity Trimmings's murder." Agatha steadied herself against the fence, heart pounding, boots caked in mud. Relief surged beneath her pride, tempered by irritation. She hadn't fainted. She hadn't collapsed. She had watched and waited. Bill straightened, glancing at her. "I stayed close because I couldn't bear anything happening to you," he admitted quietly. Agatha blinked. a strange warmth creeping across her chest. She opened her mouth to respond, then paused. She didn't need protecting. She had handled herself, and yet secretly she acknowledged the truth. Perhaps this once, just this once, she might have. "You didn't have to," she muttered finally, voice dry, almost wry. "I can handle myself perfectly well." Bill's lips pressed into a thin line, half smile, half reproach. "Perhaps," he said softly, "but I'm glad I did." Agatha let out a long breath, mud squelching beneath her boots, wind biting at her cheeks. Malcolm Jenkins was being led away, handcuffed, struggling in vain, while the village green remained eerily still. Her mind raced, reviewing every clue: the notebook, the broken teacup symbols, the insurance claims, the poisoned wine, and the panic-stricken shoves that had become threats. Hodge would have been horrified, she murmured to herself, glancing down at her cat, now perched on the gatepost of the shop. The feline's tail flicked in judgment, as though chastising her for any slip in detective work. Charles Fraith materialized beside her, casually brushing mud from his trousers. "Darling," he murmured, eyebrows arching, "you've been positively heroic, almost daring, I might add." "Flattery," she said dryly, "does not accelerate the apprehension of murderers." Roy Silver, finally arriving breathless, added his voice in dramatic tones. "Divine, the villain revealed, the heroine unscathed, I declare, this village has never been so thrilling." Agatha ignored the theatrics. She surveyed Malcolm Jenkins, now seated grimly in the back of the patrol car, officers keeping him securely restrained. He had confessed, unmasked, and the poisoner of Felicity Trimmings had been brought to justice. And yet, a faint sense of unease lingered. Something subtle, some hidden detail that she couldn't yet place, tickled her instincts. "All done?" she asked Bill, though her tone suggested doubt. "For now," he said, voice clipped but calm. "Teresa's been accounted for. Malcolm's arrested. The immediate threat is neutralized." Agatha nodded, though her mind already raced ahead, pondering motives, opportunities, and the faint traces of deceit that had lingered even after the arrest. The village had been shaken, secrets unveiled, and danger confronted. But Carsley, she knew, always held one more shadow, one more twist waiting in the hedgerows. Bill glanced at her, concern softening into something more private. "You were brilliant today," he admitted quietly. "Of course," she said crisply, brushing mud from her skirt. Pride, a stubborn spark, rose to her cheeks. "I'm always brilliant." Yet inside, a flicker of humility persisted. She had been in peril, yes, and Bill had been there to intervene. She hadn't required protection, but it had been reassuring, if only slightly, to know someone cared enough to stay nearby. Hodge jumped lightly onto the gate, flicking his tail. Agatha patted his head, appreciating his silent counsel. The cat's calm, judgmental presence reminded her that life, though messy and dangerous, still held the small comforts of routine and domesticity. The wind gusted again across the village green, lifting fallen leaves into chaotic swirls. Agatha breathed in the crisp air, allowing the tension to ease slightly from her shoulders. Carsley had survived another scandal, and the murderer had been exposed. She had acted with courage, wit, and tenacity, the hallmarks of her particular brand of bravery. Yet as she watched the patrol car disappear with Malcolm Jenkins, a shadow of unease persisted. Something still nagged at her instincts, a subtle inconsistency in Teresa's reactions, the timing of certain threats, the sequence of Felicity's discoveries. There was one final piece, one last angle, still unaccounted for. Agatha's lips pressed together as she realized it. Justice had been served in one sense, yes, but Carsley's tapestry of secrets remained unfinished. The story was not complete. She sighed and looked down at Hodge, who stretched languidly on the gatepost, his paws extended and tail curling with understated judgment. "I suppose we'll find out soon enough," she murmured, voice quiet but resolute. "Someone else is out there, and we'll have to see this through." Bill's hand brushed hers briefly, a small gesture of reassurance. Agatha ignored the flutter it caused in her chest, focusing instead on the practical matters ahead, the notebook, the clues, and the village's enduring capacity for deception. The sun climbed higher, glinting off frost-mottled roofs and gilded hedgerows. Carsley remained calm on the surface, the village green seemingly innocent and placid. But Agatha knew the truth. Beneath that gentle exterior lurked ambition, malice, and secrets waiting to be unearthed. And she, naturally, would be in the thick of it, boots muddied, scarf askew, mind alert, and senses sharp. She lit a cigarette carefully, inhaling deeply. The smoke curled upward in lazy, curling spirals, almost in mockery of the chaos still swirling through the village. "One day," she murmured to Hodge, tail flicking, eyes half closed in judgment, "I may even get a full night's sleep." The cat blinked at her, unimpressed, as if to say, "Unlikely." Agatha Raisin exhaled smoke and determination alike. The real killer had been revealed, Malcolm Jenkins brought to justice, but the game, the chase, the delicate threads of Carsley's secrets, these were far from concluded. Winter sunlight filtered softly across Carsley, brushing honeystone cottages with a delicate glow. Frost lingered in shaded lanes, but warmth lingered in the village's kitchens and tea shops. Agatha Raisin stepped from her cottage onto the lane, scarf snug around her neck, boots crunching lightly over frost-crusted gravel. The air smelled faintly of wood smoke and drying leaves, comforting after weeks of fear, suspicion, and nearly fatal intrigue. The WI hall buzzed with activity, not the energetic chatter of a successful evening, but the tentative, careful kind that comes after scandal. Conversation stopped abruptly when Agatha entered. Eyes flicked up, mouths tightened. A few villagers coughed, mumbled apologies, or avoided her gaze entirely. The shepherd's pie incident, so humiliating once, now felt almost quaint compared with Felicity's poisoning, Teresa's panic, and Malcolm Jenkins' arrest. Doris Simpson, pale and fidgeting, approached first. "Mrs. Raisin," she whispered, cheeks flushed, "I'm terribly sorry about the pie. It was unkind." Agatha gave a small, wry smile. "Thank you, Doris. I suppose it's all relative now, isn't it?" She allowed herself a private chuckle at how a shop-bought meal could seem so monumental in hindsight. Joan Tibby shuffled past, offering a timid nod, and murmured, "Apologies, Agatha. I should have spoken up sooner." Agatha inclined her head, noting the nervous tightness in Joan's shoulders. Even the minor players had learned lessons, or at least she hoped. Mrs. Bloxby entered, carrying a small plate with a perfectly cut slice of lemon drizzle cake. She placed it gently on the table beside Agatha, eyes soft and warm. "You are brave, Mrs. Raisin," she said quietly, "and worth protecting." Agatha took the plate, touched unexpectedly by the gentle reassurance. She managed a tight smile. "Thank you, Mrs. Bloxby. That means more than you realize." The day passed in a measured, reflective rhythm. Agatha returned to her cottage briefly, Hodge weaving between her ankles, purring faintly. The fire crackled, casting a warm glow across the sitting room. For a few moments the village's chaos seemed distant, a story safely closed. Bill Wong appeared shortly after noon, unannounced but expected. He entered with quiet footsteps, his coat still dusted with frost, eyes carrying a mixture of concern and something unspoken. "Afternoon, Agatha," he said softly, voice careful. "Bill," she replied, setting her teacup down with deliberate calm, "you didn't need to come all this way." "I wanted to," he said simply. He paused, choosing words, the weight of recent events pressing in. "Thank you for not getting yourself killed." Agatha's lips twitched in a half-smile, half-smirk. "And thank you," she said after a moment, "for breaking every rule in the book to keep me safe." Bill looked away briefly, clearing his throat. "One hopes it won't need repeating." They both laughed quietly, a soft sound that filled the room with warmth. Words remained unspoken, hovering between them. Care, pride, unacknowledged affection, all conveyed in the briefest glances. There was a civility to it, an intimacy without intrusion, the sort that only long-shared dangers could create. Charles Fraith arrived moments later, his timing impeccable and utterly inconvenient. He leaned against the doorway, boots muddy, hands in pockets, a playful smirk tugging at his lips. "Ah," he drawled, "the heroine of Carsley, mud and all. And here I thought I was early for tea." Agatha glared at him, though the corner of her mouth twitched in amusement. "Charles, must you always ruin atmospheres with your flair for commentary?" "Merely observing reality," he said with a shrug. "And your shoes, dear lady, truly tragic. Mud, frost, heroics, it's all quite cinematic. Agatha rolled her eyes, but inwardly she noted how even minor irritations felt welcome after the intensity of the past weeks. The mundane could be charming, even comforting. Bill stood quietly in the background, offering a small, sad smile to the interaction. His presence was steady, reassuring, and subtly protective without dominating the space. He departed with a courteous nod, leaving Agatha with the faint ache of both gratitude and exasperation. Alone at last, Agatha returned to the sitting room. Hodge leapt onto her lap with regal indifference, tail curling over his paws. She scratched him lightly behind the ears, appreciating the simplicity of domesticity after so much upheaval. The fire crackled, the faint aroma of lemon drizzle lingering in the air, and for a moment she allowed herself to breathe without calculation or suspicion. She picked up a single cigarette, her first of the day, lighting it with precise care. Smoke spiraled lazily toward the ceiling, curling like a quiet question mark. The room felt warm, safe, yet her mind remained alert, attuned to the subtle rhythms of village life that could shift so suddenly from calm to the chaos. Agatha considered the path that had led her here. Felicity's arrogance and meticulous records, Malcolm Jenkins' greed, Teresa Colville's evasive calculations, and the small victories she had orchestrated with stubborn determination. Justice had been served, the immediate threats were neutralized, and yet she knew the village's serenity was fragile, always subject to disruption. She glanced at Hodge, who yawned and stretched, regal as ever. "You understand," she whispered, a faint smile brushing her lips. "Trouble may sleep for now, but it never truly rests." Outside, the soft winter sun glinted off frost-mottled hedgerows. Castle Green was quiet, the lane empty except for the occasional flutter of leaves. The village had survived scandal, poison, and deceit, yet life persisted, stubborn and ordinary in its way. Agatha exhaled smoke, letting her gaze linger on the shifting shadows of the room. Each curl of smoke mirrored the lingering questions, the subtle threats that might yet rise again. But for today, the balance of the village had been restored, her courage affirmed, and her cunning proved. She took a careful sip of tea, letting the warmth spread through her, savouring the peace without overestimating its permanence. Outside, the sun rose higher, melting frost and illuminating cottages in gentle amber light. Hodge stretched lazily, tail flicking, content in his quiet dominion over the armchair. Agatha lit another, more contemplative puff, watching smoke rise and dissipate, tracing patterns that reminded her that life in Castle was never truly predictable. She might rest, she might reflect, but vigilance was a constant companion. Her thoughts wandered to Bill Wong, Charles Fraith, Roy Silver, and even the quiet wisdom of Mrs. Bloxby. Each had played their part, each had contributed to unravelling the mystery that had threatened to unravel the village. Gratitude, subtle and unspoken, mingled with amusement at the absurdity of the shepherd's pie, the poisoned wine, and the intricate social ballet of the W.I. Finally, she leaned back, exhaling slowly, Hodge purring in response, her cat's presence anchoring her. Agatha Raisin, detective, gossip, village heroine, an occasional victim of her own impulsiveness, allowed herself the merest flicker of contentment. Castle was safe again, at least for now, and though she knew, as always, that trouble would return sooner or later, she allowed herself to savour the quiet warmth of her home, the faint aroma of lemon drizzle, and the steady, comforting weight of Hodge across her lap. A single cigarette burned down to its nub. Smoke curled toward the ceiling, a curling, quiet question mark. Agatha smiled faintly, eyes on the shifting shadows. The village, with all its secrets, its follies, and its quiet dangers, would endure, and so would she. The wind outside whispered faintly through the lane. Frost glinted. Castle held its secrets close for now. And in the gentle winter sunlight, Agatha Raisin, resolute, weary, and undeniably alive, watched, waited, and thought. The game was never truly over. Hodge stretched, pawing at the rug. Agatha inhaled slowly, letting the moment of domestic peace fill her chest. One quiet day at least, a day to sip tea, watch smoke, and ponder the enduring mysteries of her charmingly exasperating village.